The United Nations defines human rights as the rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. When these rights are violated, abused, ignored, or denied by state or non-state individuals, this becomes a human rights violation. These rights include, but are not limited to, the rights to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, and the right to work and education. According to Sandra Gilhiego from What Needs to Be Done, Occupational Therapy Responsibilities and Challenges Regarding Human Rights, it states that the poor, migrants, ethnic minorities, and people with disabilities or mental disorders are common victims to human rights violations. If you remember from the Willard and Spackman book, Chapter 2, A Contextual History of Occupational Therapy, Christensen discussed the 19th century as individuals with disabilities were often ostracized from the rest of society in cruel conditions. In Musai and Forwell et al. Article, they refer to this time period as practitioners using the biomedical approach. However, Musai and Forwell et al. Pinpoint a pivotal emergence of human rights approach in 2007 at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It was an international community response to the long history of discrimination, exclusion, and dehumanization of individuals with disabilities. This meeting set the tone to say, hey, people with disabilities are people too. This led to the human rights approach in occupational therapy, which takes into consideration the complex interactions between psychological, cultural, and socio-political factors. As much as you'd like to think that human rights violations don't happen anymore, there are a number of ways that people's human rights are being violated every day. As an example, using an article found on U.S. News and World Report, this article talked about the recent environmental catastrophe of Hurricane Michael. It is reported that a man by the name of Clinton Mosley has a right leg below the knee amputation and has suffered by the hands of Hurricane Michael, his home destroyed and flooded. With no other choice due to the poverty and poor socio-economic status and no job, he is unable to move out of his home to a safer place to live. This is an example of a largely common human rights violation wherein the United Nations Article 25 states that every individual should have a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family. You may be thinking that by now, how does human rights violations have anything to do with occupational therapy? Well, hold still, my friend, because it has everything to do with it. As occupational therapists, we constantly come into contact with many individuals from all different types of backgrounds, disabilities, and ages. In the Willard and Spackman book, Chapter 41 on Occupational Justice, Wilcock and Townsend explain that occupations and occupational justice are occupational practices that support human rights. It gives forth the idea that we need human rights to be able to participate in the occupations that give us balance, that if violated would otherwise make us marginalized and imbalanced. Going back to Clinton Mosley, the hurricane sufferer, he could not fulfill his occupational duties as a caretaker to his mother and a provider because of his disability and due to the damage caused to his home. As an occupational therapy practitioner, it is an ethical duty for any therapist to become an advocate for those who are suffering at the hands of human rights violations due to disability or illness. Hawking et al. In Doing Human Rights in Diverse Occupational Therapy Practices states that some ways to increase awareness is language, or participating in the WFOT International Advisory Group on Human Rights, and establishing their own position of power for those who can't. But the biggest thing that Hawking et al. Found was that there was a need to create visibility for human rights within educational programs, to therefore have occupational therapists play a role as a teacher and put human rights in the curricula, ensuring that graduate students like us are competent and understanding enough about human rights violations.